Some crimes make headlines. Others are swallowed by time, buried in cold case files, and in whispered legends. From the shores of the Great Lakes to the darkest corners of the world, we uncover the killers, cults, and crimes that haunt history. Welcome to the Great Lakes Crime Club, where the stories run darker than the waters. In the mid-90s, predators lurked in the streets of Grand Rapids, Michigan. Women were disappearing, their bodies found later in secluded, wooded places, or never found at all. For the women working in the corners, the streets felt darker, heavier, thick with fear. Even myself, as a 9-year-old at the time, knew that this wasn't a safe part of town. Yet, with little fanfare in the press, few people knew the full story of the 17 victims. Decades later, a man was arrested and linked to some of these murders, but lingering questions remain. Was he responsible for all of them? Or do even darker secrets still hide in the corners of Grand Rapids? As Christmas 1993 approached, Grand Rapids families braved the cold to finish their holiday shopping. Talk Boys were flying off the shelves, and Mighty Morphin Power Rangers were the must-have toys of the season. Most adults enjoyed the warmth of their homes, wrapping presents and preparing for the holidays. But for some women, work kept them outside, shivering on street corners, waiting for the next John to drive up. On December 12, 1993, Linda McHugh had the night off. Her sister Norma recalls Linda getting dressed up to go out with friends. Norma begged her to be careful. Linda just smiled and said, "I will. I love you, Norma. I'll see you later." But she never came home. When Christmas Day arrived and Linda was still missing, her family knew something was terribly wrong. Linda would have never missed Christmas. As Linda and her siblings were growing up, they experienced alcohol-related abuse. In order to cope with this environment, Linda started drinking at around 13 years old. But she persevered, eventually graduating high school, holding down jobs, getting married, and having a child of her own. But unfortunately, Linda fell back into addiction. And as you'll see, addiction was a common thing among the women who worked the 3-mile stretch between Wealthy Street and 28th Street. Most of these women turned to the streets not just for survival, but to feed an addiction that trapped them in a cruel cycle, turning tricks for a fix, then self-medicating to escape the shame of it. Around 3 in the morning that night, Linda called her boyfriend. She was extremely upset and wanted him to pick her up at the Bottle House, a party store on Division Avenue. I should note here that party store is our local slang for a liquor store. By the time he got there, Linda was gone, and she's never been found. Her sister Norma had this to say about Linda. "She has a family. She was a human, you know. She was just a really nice person, nurturing, always looking out for me, not selfish in any way." And her brother James said, "She wouldn't go 30 years without talking to anybody, and there's no way. She loved us all. She always wanted to do everything for everybody." In the early hours of January 2nd, 1994, while I slept in anticipation of my 9th birthday party, another woman vanished into the night. Lisa Oatberg was a mother of 3. Similar to Linda, she struggled with an addiction. According to witnesses, she was seen getting into a John's car around 4:30 a.m. at Division and Cottage Grove, just a mile north from where Linda normally worked. Lisa's daughter Candy was 9 years old when she saw her mother last, on Christmas Day of 1993. Candy had opened her last presents from her mom to find press-on fake nails and a Barbie doll. 3 months after she vanished, Lisa Oatberg was found, naked, in some bushes, 40 miles from Grand Rapids in Muskegon. She'd been strangled to death. Her daughter, Candy, found out from the news. She recalls being excited that her mother had been found. Sadly, Candy thought this was a good thing, that her mother was found alive. But she wasn't. And today, Candy still seeks more information about what happened to her mom. Just 8 months later, another body was found, this time in a ditch in Ottawa County near 32nd Avenue and Arthur Street by a pair of rabbit hunters. For 27 years, this woman remained unidentified, known only to investigators as Matilda. But in January of 2022, genealogical testing by the nonprofit organization known as the DNA Doe Project identified this woman as Shelley Ray Christian. In 1993, Shelley had been 29 years old and also struggled with addiction. Her sister, Shauna, remembers her as a caring person and isn't really sure what brought her sister from Minnesota to Michigan. She thinks it was possible it was to make money on Division like the other women because a blue heel was found near her remains. Shelley had a knee issue, so she didn't normally wear heels. In fact, it was the knee issue that led to Shelley's issues. As a teen, she had knee surgeries and took prescription pain meds, but unfortunately the need for pain relief spiraled out of control. In an interview with Wood TV 8, Shauna spoke about the stigma surrounding sex work. She said, "Serial killers pick up women in this line of work because they believe no one will care. No one's looking for them." And that is not true. I want to find out who did this. This is my new passion. As investigators struggled with Shelley's case, another tragedy unfolded. On January 18, 1995, 37-year-old Robin Scott became the next victim. According to police records, she intended to work at the corner of Division and Putnam. Her sister reported her missing. She was last seen heading out to work at about 3 a.m. Robin was a small woman, 5'1" and just 100 pounds. And her body's never been found. Police still consider her case to be an open homicide to this day. On June 2, 1995, police walked the banks of the Grand River near Veterans Memorial Drive. A man who'd gone down there to trap minnows came across a grisly scene. On a shoal, there was a fire pit, a single boot, and a trail of blood leading up to and across the road. Across the road, at the end of the trail, Pamela Lynn Verrilli's body was found. She'd been beaten to death. The Walker police investigation concluded that she'd been beaten to death on the riverbank, then drug uphill. Several hours before her death, she had been seen at an Amoco gas station located at Hall and Division, where she'd purchased a cup of coffee. Pam's daughter Sarah said, "She deserves justice, and to be at peace, and to be able to rest, because she can't yet. I don't want her to be just another number. To me, she wasn't just some prostitute or drug addict. Those were her life choices, but that didn't make her who she was. It didn't define her as a person. She's still a very good person. People loved her. People either wanted to be her or know her or be with her." Sarah doesn't think her mom's murder is connected to the others. She believes Pam had been working with the police as an informant, and that may have been what got her killed. What's interesting to me about this is I drive that area and ride that area with my bike quite often, and up until recently I had no idea that somebody was murdered right there. On June 15, 1995, a young mother left her house to head to the party store at Oakdale and Eastern. Fonda Lockridge was just 26 years old. When she failed to return home, her sister reported her missing. Fonda had 2 young children. Her family knew she'd never leave them by choice. During the police investigation, when her nephew was interviewed, he claimed that he had seen her last on June 16th, the following day, at the corner of Hall and Prospect. Fonda had asked him if she could borrow $5 and was never seen again. According to police records, Fonda's case is also still an open homicide. On July 7, 1995, 2 sisters arrived in Grand Rapids having heard about its red light district. Deanna Dennis was 34 and Kathleen was 28. Once in town, they went to a club to get a few drinks, then went out to work on Division. The sisters would see each other occasionally throughout the night, but when Deanna returned to their hotel room, Kathleen wasn't there, and she never returned. Her last glimpse of Kathleen was as she climbed into a light-colored 60s Chevy at Division and Putnam, the very same corner where Robin Scott had vanished just 6 months earlier. Another coincidence? Or the work of a predator lurking in plain sight? When Deanna reported her sister missing, police allegedly refused to help. Determined to find Kathleen, their mother traveled from Omaha to Grand Rapids, and they searched the streets and alleys hoping to find some evidence of Kathleen. To Deanna, Kathleen wasn't just a sister. She was the one who could make her laugh until her stomach hurt, the one who wrestled on the bed with her in the hotel room, the one who made even the darkest nights feel lighter. Even as the bodies piled up and the news spread, something baffling happened. Women kept going out, kept meeting with men, kept taking the risk. They knew a predator was out there, so I couldn't help wondering, why didn't they stop? An article by Teresa McClellan in the Grand Rapids Press provided some insight, straight from somebody who'd lived it. Tanya Tyler had escaped addiction and the streets, but she carried the weight of what she'd seen. Her words cut through that speculation. This is what she had to say. "The girls out there, they're on drugs, their lives are chaotic, and they're in constant emotional turmoil. You'd think after seeing the murders on TV they'd stop, but when you're smoking crack, you need money to get high, no matter the risk, no matter the cost. And that's really scary, but that's the way it is." The morning of October 12th started like any other, until a passerby stumbled upon a horror they would never forget. Lying near Leonard and Crahan Avenue was the body of 39-year-old Gail Annette Cook, strangled and discarded. Gail had gone missing on October 4th and was last seen at Front and Wealthy Street. From what I could gather about her, Gail had been on a prison work release, but had escaped several months earlier. Most likely she was on division to support herself, trying to earn legitimate business which might have gotten her caught and sent back to prison. Weeks passed, but Grand Rapids wasn't done with its secrets. This time, beneath the train tracks at Ann Street and Elizabeth Avenue, the water held something grim. A woman's body left to the current. It was November 7th, 1995, and the body was that of 25-year-old Dawn Marie Shaver. Police determined she'd been strangled, and her upper body showed signs of assault, including head injuries. For nearly a year, Grand Rapids women of the night held their breath. Maybe, just maybe, the nightmare was over. But on August 6th, 1996, reality came crashing back. A city worker, trudging through a wooded area near Curve Street and Underhill Avenue, stumbled upon the decomposed remains of 36-year-old Michelle Ann Becker. The lull was over. Michelle had gone missing just 4 months prior, on April 27th, from Division Avenue. Due to the state of decomposition, cause of death was indeterminable. After losing her husband to a heart attack, Michelle had spiraled, and she turned to the streets to deal with the fallout of his death. On the same day Michelle disappeared, Sherry Stewart Brown also went missing. She was last seen on her 32nd birthday by her parents, who'd come with her 2 children to visit her. They gave Sherry a peach cobbler and spent time with her before leaving. 3 days later, when they returned, Sherry was nowhere to be found. On July 22, 1998, her naked skeletal remains were found by a couple who'd been rounding up stray dogs near Butterworth Drive in Maynard. For nearly 4 years, Sherry Brown was just a nameless set of bones. It wasn't until forensic experts reconstructed her face from her skull that she was finally given her name back. Her younger sister Deborah had the following to say about her. "I just want to make sure that I can relate to you how special she was. She was very strong-willed and fiercely protective of me. I loved her ability to speak up for herself, and that she taught me how to do that." It wouldn't be long before another body was found. On September 21, 1996, a jogger discovered naked and decomposed remains of a woman near the 1900 block of O'Brien near Butterworth, not even 2 miles from where Sherry's remains were discovered. A police investigation found the remains to be those of 27-year-old Sonia Marie Campos. She'd been missing since September 4th and had to be identified through her tattoos. Kathleen Robinson, Sonia's mother, never stopped fighting. To her, it was painfully clear. Her daughter's case had been treated as an afterthought, a footnote in a tragedy that was swallowing the city. In Detroit, the night before Halloween is known as Devil's Night. But in 1996, in Michigan, October was the Devil's Month. 4 more victims were found. On October 1st, at Canwright Street, the remains of Dawn Charlene Phillips' body was found. Her death was listed as homicide by unknown means. Dawn was 26 and had been missing since January 19 of 1996. In an interview, her husband said this of her. "She was mixed up with the drugs and all the other stuff they say she did, but that wasn't the real Dawn. The real Dawn was a loving mother, a beautiful wife, and a very dear friend to me when my downtimes came around." 2 days later, on October 3rd, a delivery driver found a body wrapped in an electric blanket in a ditch on the side of 76th Street. The body was in a state of undress, clad just in a bra, earrings, and necklace. Police identified the body as that of 29-year-old Sharon K. Hammock. Sharon had been hogtied with rope and electrical cord. Sharon was a mother of 2 and unfortunately was pregnant with her 3rd child when she died. After an autopsy was performed, her cause of death was determined to be ligature strangulation. Sharon had suffered 2 stab wounds to her scalp, as well as bruising on her neck and face. Although she'd tried to get clean for her children's sake, Sharon had struggled with addiction throughout her life, but due to a lack of insurance, she kept getting kicked out of rehab programs. 10 days later, on October 13th, a woman's naked body was found behind a business at Ionia Avenue and Logan Street. For a little over a week, the body was a Jane Doe. But 9 days after she was found, Patricia Johnson called the police to report her 39-year-old daughter Cheryl Lynn Mason is missing. Cheryl's family became concerned after she failed to appear for her daughter's birthday, and then they read about the other women in the paper. Due to this phone call, police were able to identify the body as Cheryl's. Similar to the other women, Cheryl had an addiction, and it caused her to turn to the streets to finance it. Her troubles spiraled so far out of control that she lost custody of her children and split up with her husband. Although this entire tale took place in the town I grew up in, This one surprised me the most. About 10 years ago, a place called the Downtown Market opened at that location. The Downtown Market features various local sellers ranging from sushi to fish to chocolate to cheese to craft pops. When you leave the parking lot, the back driveway faces out right to where Cheryl was found. I've been to that location many times in this last decade, and I never knew this sad part of its history. I don't think I'll ever be able to forget that whenever I drive through there again. While out hunting squirrels on 20 Mile Road near Sparta Avenue on October 27th, a man found a body that would later be identified as 29-year-old Victoria Moore. Around August 12th, Victoria had bravely testified in court against 3 teenage dealers who had viciously beaten a woman in December of '95, apparently because she was going to a house of a known competitor in the illegal trade. Victoria and another person witnessed the attack and were likely instrumental in calling the police and ambulances to aid the woman. Sadly, the woman succumbed to her injuries 5 days later in the hospital. All 3 perpetrators were convicted and sentenced to long prison sentences. Victoria vanished almost as soon as the trial ended, a disappearance that seems almost too perfectly timed to be a coincidence, but whether the police ever pursued a connection to the trial remains a mystery. Finally, on July 31, 1997, another set of remains were found in a roadside park near Ada, on the east side of the city. Forensics from the time indicated this was a black woman in her 20s or 30s who had likely been dead since mid-1996. However, it took over 2 decades for DNA technology to identify her. In 2022, DNA Doe Project officially identified her as mother of 2, Stephanie Renee Judson, who'd experienced similar struggles to the other women in this case. Her remains were finally able to be returned to her family, who remember her as someone with a heart of gold. In early 1996, as the bodies continued to appear, 5 local law enforcement agencies joined forces: Grand Rapids Police, Walker Police, Muskegon Police, Wyoming Police, and the Kent County Sheriff's Department. The mission of the task force was simple: find the killer before more women died. One of their first leads was a man named Jamal Lacey, described as a very viable suspect in at least 3 of the murders. A witness had seen him with Lisa Oatberg's ID. Shelley Christensen's body was discovered near his girlfriend's parents' home, an area he likely knew well, and Michelle Becker's body was found close to where he lived. Then something happened. Lacey was arrested for the attempted strangulation of another woman from Division, and the killing stopped. The city exhaled, but for the families, there was no relief. Without answers, all they had were questions. Had the killer been arrested? Or was this just a coincidence and Jamal Lacey was arrested, but the killer had moved away or died? In 1997, Lacey was sentenced to life in prison for the brutal attempted strangulation of 2 women, one of them underage. The sentence was severe, but Judge Dennis Kalenda made it clear why. He said, "You are a sexual predator who will prey on women as long as the opportunity presents itself. If allowed to go free, someday you will kill somebody." Lacey has never been convicted of murder, but the fact that some of the women died by strangulation does make it plausible that he could have been involved in some of these cases, despite the fact that his DNA officially ruled him out of the cases of Pam Verrilli and Sharon Hammock early on. Over the years, numerous investigators have visited him in prison, but he refuses to provide the police with any information. With Lacey, their main suspect behind bars, the killings seemingly over, and funding running dry, the task force was disbanded on February of 1997. For the victims' families, the decision felt like abandonment. Kathleen Robinson, Sonia's mother, was devastated. She said Sonia couldn't get enough love. She gave us a lot of love in everything she did. I just think it's unfair. I strongly believe that if my daughter and the other girls didn't have the label as prostitutes and drug users, the investigation would continue. After the task force ended, little progress was made until almost a decade after the murders had begun. Then in 2003 to 2004, several things happened to bring a reinvigoration to the case, at least for the Kent County Sheriff's Department. By 2003, advances in DNA technology gave detectives renewed hope. They retested evidence from Sharon Hammock's case, the best preserved crime scene, searching for the breakthrough they'd waited years for. Then, in January of 2004, the nightmare returned. Yvonne Renee Scott vanished under circumstances hauntingly similar to the victims from a decade prior. Yvonne, a member of the Sault Ste. Marie tribe of Chippewa Indians, was last seen walking along 28th Street near Clyde Park. She had struggled like so many before her, but she was trying to turn her life around. Still, the circumstances felt eerily similar to the 90s disappearances. Shortly after this, Kent County Sheriff's Department detectives Sergeant Jeff McElry, Mark Burns, and Richard Coxon were assigned to the Sharon Hammock case. They started by re-interviewing many of the people interviewed in 1996 and looked into the information that the DNA evidence showed. Although there was no match to DNA in the system, having potential suspects provide DNA samples became a huge part of their continued investigation. Around the same time, the Grand Rapids Press published a front-page article entitled "String of GR Prostitute Murders Stopped, But Why?" This brought the public's attention back to the case again. In it, family members and former task force members were re-interviewed by the press. The article only listed 11 women, though. The 4 missing women were not included. Sherry Brown and Stephanie Judson, whose remains were not located during the 93 to 96 timeframe, and Yvonne Scott, who the press obviously didn't connect to the 90s murders, were not listed either. The article was blunt in its criticism of law enforcement. If nothing else, it put public pressure back on the department. Through their interviews, detectives Burns and Coxon uncovered an additional suspect, Gregory Kelly, who they described as a very dangerous and violent individual. While the case file is highly redacted, in connecting those interviews with my outside knowledge of this case, I believe Gregory Kelly to be somebody that the women knew and considered dangerous. I don't know for certain that the story was about him, but several women who were interviewed described a situation where a man was taking a group of women to Detroit to work the streets for him. One of the women said something that angered him, so he pulled the truck over, kicked all the women but her out, then he drove to a parking lot and physically punished her. Again, I don't know with 100% certainty if the story was about Gregory Kelly, but he did go to prison in 2005 for transporting women of the night to Detroit. Incidentally, one of the women connected with him was none other than Stephanie Judson. Kelly died in 2020 from complications of COVID-19. Understandably, Yvonne Scott was on Detective Burns and Coxon's radar throughout the case. The police report has them referencing a January 2004 missing woman several times while interviewing potential witnesses, and she was the only person I could find who seemed to match that description. They were probably hoping to not only solve the case of Sharon Hammock, but to provide answers to Yvonne's grieving family as well. During their investigation, Detective Burns and Coxon learned about a new interesting DNA test which could help identify the ancestry of suspects. They immediately sent in the foreign DNA found with Sharon Hammock's body. Reflecting on this now, in a time when anyone can submit their DNA for genetic testing to a site like 23andMe or Ancestry.com, I realized again how groundbreaking that this was back in 2005. And the test results did exactly what the detectives had hoped. It showed the likely murderer, at least the murder of Sharon Hammock, was a white male, effectively eliminating 2 of the police's top suspects, Jamal Lacey and Gregory Kelly. After 2 years of interviewing over 100 people with potential connections to the case, administering around 25 DNA swabs and around 5 polygraph tests, McElry, Burns, and Coxon felt there were a few leads left to follow. However, the case remained open, with the detectives hopeful that DNA would eventually solve the case. Their hopes were spot on. In 2021, the case was assigned to Detective John Teinhoff. His first step was to submit the DNA to Identifiers International, an organization that did genealogical testing to try to match with family members. Within 6 months, a close family match to the DNA was found, but in order to determine if the suspect was a son or a brother of the individual in question, the DNA of that individual's spouse was needed. Detective Teinhoff and a colleague visited the home and told the woman in question that they were looking to identify remains from DNA related to a cold case. The woman obligingly complied and provided the detectives with a cheek swab. Finally, after 25 years, detectives had their break. On July 28, 2022, the DNA led them to 4 possible suspects. But only one had a history in West Michigan, Gary Dean Artman. Detectives quickly focused on Gary Artman, and the more they looked into his history, the more everything seemed to connect. In addition to living in Michigan, Artman had previously done time in prison in Michigan as well, when he served an 11-year sentence for, guess what? Criminal sexual conduct. He had picked up 2 teenage girls in Port Huron, Michigan in the 80s and hurt them, but thankfully he was caught and prosecuted. And during his first stint in prison, Artman had heard by multiple people saying that his mistake was leaving his victims alive. When he was arrested in 1993, Artman first lived at Herkimer Hotel right on Division Avenue, just north of Wealthy Street. He apparently moved around a lot, living for a period of time in Marne to the west of the city and in Kentwood on 54th Street, just to list a few places. Eventually, he got into the trucking business. While he was in Grand Rapids, he did run shorter distances for local companies, but around 1996, around the same time the women stopped disappearing, he began doing long-haul trucking, traveling across the country and spending much less time in the Grand Rapids area. Their noose was tightening. Detectives were sure they had their man. Now they just had to find him. In conjunction with the trucking company, they pinpointed Artman's location in Mississippi, where he was in the midst of a long-haul stint. On August 18, 2022, Artman's freedom came to a sudden end. Mississippi Highway Patrol pulled over his truck on I-59. The arrest was swift. He had no idea the past had finally caught up to him.
Route 26, stay on that route. Close that route.
He getting out? Put your hands up in the air! Make the way for I don't give a shit! Put your
There goes my fucking career. And there goes my life.
Detectives Teinhoff and Hines were already en route to Mississippi to interview Artman. From a Freedom of Information Act request, I was able to obtain some of their interrogation footage of Artman. Here are some of the most relevant clips from the hours of his ramblings. In one video, he stated about prostitutes. He didn't have means to use hookers right after prison, but he did use a couple in Grand Rapids, and he picked them up on Division Street, usually between Wealthy and 28th. He called it a seedier part of town. At the time, he drove a Geo Tracker. Unfortunately, the names he remembered were redacted. When he was with Gallant Trucking, he would pick prostitutes up and go to Denny's or the mall on 28th Street. He claims he picked up hitchhikers a couple times, but didn't imply anything happened with them. He recalls a woman with a green round bag. He picked her up. She was going to go to someplace in Texas. So she rode with him for a couple of days, and that was it. That was when he was with Equity Transport. The last prostitute he claims to have used was in Denver, Colorado, when he paid $20 circa 2018. In another video, Artman calls prostitutes pieces of meat.
They're a commodity, a piece of meat. That's what I used them as. Pay them, get out, bye.
He said it's a business. You give them money and they carry it out. They're a commodity, a piece of meat. And that's what he used them as. While in Mississippi, detectives also inventoried his personal vehicle and his semi-tractor, finding some women's jewelry, but nothing I could find that was conclusively connected to any of the women we've discussed. They also eventually got a warrant to search a storage unit rented by Artman. They found a cooler full of women's underwear. I believe these are the images, but they were redacted in the police report, so I'm not really sure. The police photos also showed highlighted passages in numerous religious books and a bunch of really uninteresting clutter that I don't think was related to the case. So here's what he highlighted in those religious books. One was Our Covenant with God by Kenneth Copeland. Another was his personal copy of the Bible, version and translation unknown. In Kenneth Copeland's book, Artman highlighted the following passages. The power of sin has been broken, and Satan cannot dominate you once you recognize the power of the Word of God and allow that power to operate in your life. And also, the promise is to you and will work in Jesus' name every bit as well as it did for Jesus in Galilee. We have put on Christ. We are one with him. Jesus has passed the promise to you as his joint heir. You have the right to function exactly the same way Jesus functioned in earth, by using his name. It is your promise. He has given it to you. And Jesus spoke the words, Woman, thou art loosed from thine infirmity. Then in horror of the word of God, he laid his hands on her. The power it took to enforce God's word came into action, and immediately the woman was set free. Praise the Lord. And when a person lives out from under the curse and is walking upright before God, he has the power of God in his corner. He has the power of the Spirit himself backing him. The Word of God states very clearly in the 7th chapter of Hebrews that Jesus is the surety or the guarantee of this new covenant. Jesus Christ of Nazareth will have to fail before the covenant can fail. And then from his Bible, he highlighted Jeremiah 15:2, quote, "Those destined for death to death, those for the sword to the sword, those for starvation to starvation, those for captivity to captivity." The most suspicious highlight was from Ezekiel 23. "Since you have forgotten me and thrust me behind your back, you must bear the consequences of your lewdness and prostitution. Then I said about the one worn out by adultery, now let them use her as a prostitute, for that's all she is. And they slept with her as men sleep with a prostitute. So they slept with those lewd women, Aholah and Oholibah. But righteous men will sentence them to the punishment of women who commit adultery and shed blood, because they are adulterous, and blood is on their hands. Bring a mob against them and give them over to terror and plunder. The mob will stone them and cut them down with their swords. They'll kill their sons and daughters and burn down their houses. So I will put an end to lewdness in the land, that all women may take warning and not imitate you. You will suffer the penalty for your lewdness and bear the consequences of your sins of idolatry. Then you will know that I am the sovereign Lord." So does this mean that Gary Artman believed he was doing God's work by murdering prostitutes to put an end to their lewdness? As crazy as that sounds, it seems plausible, and he could have used those passages to justify his terrible actions to himself. While detectives in Kent County were building the case against him for Sharon Hammock's murder, law enforcement in Frederick County, Maryland was doing the same. In August of 2022, DNA evidence linked him to the 2006 murder of Dusty Shuck, a 24-year-old woman who'd been found stabbed to death and dumped in a field. In October of 2023 in Grand Rapids, Gary Artman stood trial for the murder of Sharon Hammock. The most damning piece of evidence came from Kathleen Meredith of the Michigan State Police, who testified that DNA recovered from the electric blanket that Hammock had been wrapped in was 770 trillion times more likely to belong to Artman than to anyone else. And a former roommate of his also testified that Artman regularly sought out women of the night. On October 12, 2023, he was convicted and sentenced to life in prison.
Count 1, guilty of first-degree premeditated murder. Count 2, guilty of first-degree felony murder. Count 3, guilty of first-degree criminal sexual conduct.
Unfortunately, his time behind bars would be brief. Just 2 months later, on December 28, 2023, Artman died in prison from lung cancer. Before his death, detectives visited him a couple of times, hoping to extract confessions for other murders. In exchange for a private hospital room and a ham sandwich, double meat from Subway, Artman admitted to killing 11 women, including Sharon Hammock in '96 and Dusty Shuck in 2006. While police have not publicly shared details of his confession, one key revelation stood out. Artman mentioned a cast on one of his victims' wrists, a detail never previously released. That piece of information led investigators to connect him to Kathleen Dennis, who vanished in 1993. He also spoke about living in Marne, Michigan, a very short drive from where Shelley Christian's remains were found in the woods. He also described changing his disposal methods to dump his victims in dumpsters, an explanation for why some women's remains were never recovered. This raises even more questions. Were Linda McHugh, Fonda Lockridge, and Robin Scott also his victims? Fonda Lockridge's daughters, Tashika and Shanique, strongly believe their mother was among those that he killed, but without evidence, we may never know the full extent of Gary Artman's crimes. Some speculate that Gary Artman simply told detectives what they wanted to hear. He might have seen the number 11 in case files and decided to use it in his confession, but given his 26 years as a long-haul trucker, I think it's far more likely that he killed many more women across the country. If you know of cases involving missing or murdered women from 1996 onward, especially those fitting the same profile, I think it's possible that Artman was responsible. Despite his conviction and confession, we still don't have all the answers. DNA evidence suggests at least 3 separate killers were active in Grand Rapids during the 1990s. Some DNA was recovered from the crime scene of Pam Verrilli, but it doesn't match any known suspects. It's unclear which other cases still hold viable forensic evidence. The hope now is that advancing technology will bring long overdue justice to the remaining victims and their families. Though I didn't know these women personally, this case does feel personal to me. It happened here, in my hometown, a place I've always considered safe. But more importantly, these women also deserve to be remembered not just for their struggles, but for the lives they lived. They were mothers, daughters, and sisters. They had dreams, people loved them, and futures were stolen from them. Addiction and hardship do not define a person, and had they been given more time, they could have rebuilt their lives. They should still be here today, hugging their children, laughing with their friends, and growing old. Justice should never depend on someone's circumstances or status. Every victim matters. Every family deserves answers. If you think you may have any information about the unsolved disappearances in this case, or if you know of similar cases anywhere in the country that could be linked to Artman, please contact your local law enforcement agency. After decades of silence, these families still need closure. Every crime leaves a story. Some are well known and others are waiting to be told. And we're just getting started. If you love unraveling your own, be sure to subscribe and hit the bell. New cases drop soon and you won't want to miss them. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you with the next case.